Hi, Susan. We can't hear you. I think you might be muted if you were trying to say
Can you
something.
hear me now, Carrie?
I can. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I just called in my my daughter to help me. Now, I don't see you guys. Are you on non-video?
Mine personally is on non-video because with my internet, it tends to get a bit wonky if I have my video on. And it looks like our other folks might have their videos off right now too.
Okay, so I'll stop mine too. There.
You're welcome. You know, a lot of folks use the video, so you're welcome to do that as well.
So how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Well, a little restless.
Can be tough, especially with all the rain we've had, kind of limiting outdoor time.
Yeah, well, actually, I've been enjoying the rain because it's pretty limited to the weekdays. So yeah, not complaining. I'm just restless in that can't travel anywhere. It's like, where are we with COVID?
It is tricky.
Now I see Cliff on video. Hi, Cliff.
Oh, Cliff, I think you're muted still if you're trying to speak.
Does that work?
That works. And if Patrick Corey, oh, he just unmuted as well.
Yep. Hello. Hi.
And Susan and Cliff, I'll probably repeat this after we get more people on as well, but just to note, since we don't have a chair right now, somebody from the group will need to call the meeting to order when it's actually time to get going. So we, like I said, we don't have many folks on yet, but that was something, you know, something that we'll kind of start. And I'm not sure if Tim Moore will be here as secretary, or if anybody else kind of wants to just jump in to do that, you know, after we get maybe a bit more of a critical mass.
Okay.
Hey, Carrie, this is Joe. I'm back. I also want to let you know that we are currently streaming on our Boxcast streaming service and on the city Facebook and Twitter currently.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Great.
Andrew, I love the beard.
Thank you.
That's
It's not just a beard anymore. It's
everything.
But thank you. Thanks, Cliff.
Yeah, Rory's working on it too.
Oh yeah.
He's gone and come back.
Is that what you've done?
Yeah, I finally trimmed it basically for the first time like a week or two ago. Since this all started, really got out of hand.
Yeah. Well, I think I may be ready for a haircut here. I think it's
Actually, I think it looks good.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, don't cut it.
Yeah, you know, I think the back needs some care, but yeah, but thank you. Yeah.
You can't see the back.
That's right. Especially in Zoom, no one can ever see what's behind me. So yeah.
Exactly. We're not looking behind.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Well, good. It looks like, oh, good. I'm not sure who's in charge, actually.
So, Andrew, I mentioned a little bit earlier,
Oh,
just so we have more people. So since we don't have a chair, it'd be great if somebody in the group could call the meeting to order. It looks like we have pretty close to most of our folks on there. So whenever somebody's ready, we could start that. We usually start with matters by the public. And then we had on there to work potentially to elect a new chair and vice chair, that there was some discussion previously about perhaps changing the order of the agenda. So y'all could talk that through after we got officially going.
Okay. Well, thanks, Carrie. Then I will officially call the meeting to order. And it looks like if anyone has joined from the public, I would invite them to comment. I don't think there are, but
So it looks like we have a couple people on as attendees, so.
Oh, okay, I can't see that. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
you might not be able to.
Oh,
So
okay.
Joe or Patrick, if you're able to help us, if any of those folks are raising their hand to speak.
Sure. We have 4 in attendance currently.
Oh, okay, I can't see.
And I see Brennan Duncan there too. We could certainly promote him to panelist. How about we do that? And so now we have 3 in attendance. And if you'd like to address the task force, please use the raise hand icon and we'll call on you in order. And no takers right now.
Oh, okay, I see now. I see I clicked on participants and now you can see an attendees list on the, okay, well, if there are no takers, then, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not in charge. I just like, oh, okay, let's get started. So, but yeah, I think, oh, wait, and the chat is on, so I'm just gonna look in the chat. Oh, okay, all right, great. Well, I mean, we have to decide, do we want to vote on a chair and vice chair before we decide the future of place, or should we discuss the future of place first, which I think makes sense, but what do you all think?
Future of place. Discussion first.
I would agree that we hold any voting until we discuss the future of place.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that'll kind of determine who actually wants to
Yeah.
to do the work. So
Okay.
What do the veterans from the committee think about where place should go?
I'm disturbed to see that I think I am actually at this time the longest serving member who's not serving from another committee, I think. You know, I think technically Tim Moore, I think, is from Bar, but that's, you know, so I don't know if I don't feel like a veteran of this at all, so maybe that's part of the problem. But, you know, I would say that to kick this off, my perception of place, you know, is grounded in, is it effective in moving forward in an agenda that wouldn't have been moved forward without its existence? And I think that there have been moments over the 5 years or so that I've been a member of Place that I've felt like we've done some good. I can point to some specific instances of kind of facilitating investigation into 3D modeling of the city, you know, a 3D modeling framework for development projects. Nothing ever came of that, but the actual investigation was a useful one. It just petered out at the city level, which is something we should be talking about. Really, the whole effort to say maybe the city needs someone, a long-range planner that has a vision, I thought, you know, was something we had been pushing for a while. And I hope it doesn't peter out. I don't know the current status of that in the city. But I also got the perception that a lot of what we worked on did just kind of die within the framework of being a city advisory task force that, you know, then the city, you know, often didn't really have scope to take on what we saw as major issues. And so I don't know how effective we've been over the past little while.
as someone relatively new to the committee, because I started last August maybe, it's felt, maybe to me at least, it felt like Place was redundant to the steering committees, and everything over the course of last year that I saw was something that either I'm also on BPAC, so it's something I had seen on BPAC before, or I knew there were steering committees talking about it, and I didn't know exactly what Place was bringing to, because I know we have a little bit more professional city planner type focus with Place. I'm not one of those people. I'm just a random citizen at large, but I didn't know what are we bringing to the discussion that the steering committees aren't? And that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot more steering committees now than there were in the past, and I think that's a really good thing. And so that, you know, maybe it's time for our role to shift. And you know, I just like to remind people what PLACE stands for, at least the CE. I think it's, you know, placemaking, livability, and community engagement. And I haven't seen this group do a lot on community engagement over the years. The more robust steering committees sort of started to go in that direction. But you know, I'd like to see us take on some projects like that, things that, you know, maybe a little newer to us, more long term, as opposed to sort of a you know, presentation decision concept.
Do we make up our own agendas on where we want to get involved, or does this get handed to us by city staff?
Well, I've seen it go both ways in different boards and commissions. It can be a combination. You know, the things that we choose to take on are not necessarily things that are, you know, decided on. It can be more investigatory, you know, advisory suggestions, that sort of thing. And then, you know, the city can then decide what they want to do with that.
Okay, so I'm Susan. I've been on for about a year as well. I'm a citizen at large, but I am a landscape architect, a planner, had a civil engineering business in Lexington as well as in Bedford County. I sell real estate now. I've served on planning commissions. I've served on site plan review and approval committees in Rockbridge County, which is where I came from. And I think in order to feel effective and to apply our skills and our input, I kind of feel lost in that I don't really know what our charter is. We come in, we discuss intersections, but then nothing happens. We don't get, you know, agendas. I guess the way I would see it to be effective is if they're doing site plan review or working on design manuals, capital improvements, to come in at the beginning and produce a product summarizing our perspective, and then even taking it to community engagement, to package it, to know what it is we're looking at, and to come up with solutions and proposals and engage the community would seem a little bit more constructive to me. I'm pretty task oriented, really. So that's where I'm lost. In my year, it seems like the veterans who have now resigned sort of had so much history, and it was the rest of us who were not aware, were not familiar. I haven't been really satisfied that there's been a dissemination of information, a goal, and then a packaging, the work being done, it packaged and presented. It seems pretty loose. That's just my perspective. I don't know that I add anything. And I know I can add something.
If I may jump in briefly, I know that during some of the shredding and the public engagement process, 2018, 2019, Andrew and I think Mark were engaged and participated in a lot of that community engagement. You know, I would be sitting at a table and they'd be working with other people. So I think the public engagement part is can be helpful. And there's some people on the committee that have expertise that can actually really facilitate that process. I do think there's kind of a disconnect between understanding what council needs or wants from place and what place feels like it needs to be doing to feel adequate.
So do we have a design manual where we sort of discuss the elements of the sense of place we want, and making it livable, and how to get that out to developers, get it out to the community, and then perhaps have it adopted as guidelines for suggested place elements?
We really don't. I mean, I think that's been part of a long-term discussion at Place. You know, I guess I have been around, not for a long time, but for 5 years or 6 years. And no, Tim's here now. Tim Moore's here, so he can also. He's been around longer than I have on this committee. And you know, when there were discussions of a form-based code, of that being an approach to it, the Streets That Work plan that did, to a great degree come from Place, had a public realm streets approach to those sorts of things. We don't really have that for the private realm. So a form-based zoning code, that was always something that had been pushed by Kathy Galvin, and we didn't do that. I think the next hope was to have a visionary planner, like someone with a long range view within the city, to be hired to be able to help deal with just those sorts of issues, even in the absence of a playbook or something, a manual, a Christopher Alexander type, a cookbook or something like that. So, there have been different discussions about that, but no, we don't have anything. But a lot of those discussions came from Place about how to do it. Anyway, we haven't heard from everybody yet, so I'm sorry, I'm just answering the question.
Thank you.
So I could chime in. It looks like Tim was talking, but I wanted to. I had written down some thoughts after sort of hearing Lloyd's response to our conversation, and Susan's comments just now kind of remind me that that we don't that even though some of us have sort of archived documents from the early days of Place, a lot of that, I don't believe, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, are not, publicly available or easily findable. Annual reports, a list of accomplishments, and a good place to start in terms of where places come from, is a series of the annual reports. I know that in the early days, and I talked to Paul Josie, who was my predecessor from the Tree Commission, there were really high ambitions. And right after the Great Recession, we really had a sense of Charlottesville about to go through some serious growing pains. I mean, I've had a sense over, since that period of time that suddenly, even though the mall had started to succeed and there were some changes in businesses, there wasn't really this sense of everything booming, and the attendant change in infrastructure like West Main Street and the Belmont Bridge, and these big shifts that are sort of trying to move Charlottesville into a downtown that can really accommodate a sort of next wave of growth. I've known Charlottesville since I was a student in the late 70s, and it's really different now. And there was an acknowledgement that long-range planning had really lagged, and that NDS was just handling one building and development application after another, and was overtaxed and stretched to the limit. And there was a need to try to get something kind of on track on the fly. So Places had a series of initiatives, mostly, I would say, coordinated with outside consultants, but some of those consultants were brought in at the urging of Place with Streets That Work and involvement in the SIA and certainly engagement with West Main and the Belmont Bridge, you know, big projects that with a lot of review, how to just get everything off on the right foot. So we're in a sort of different period right now. And, you know, and I kind of agree that the right questions to ask are, you know, if we didn't exist, you know, what would fill that vacuum? Or ask ourselves, has NDS now gotten to the point where the city itself can do what we do? Or, you know, are we depending on outside consultants? Because we have cadre, sort of the development lobbying group, we have neighborhood associations, we have the Board of Architectural Review, the Planning Commission, and we'll probably have, I'm going to guess, you know, some outside groups or nonprofits or foundations that one sees in other cities who will be attempting to, you know, lobby for change kind of on the little bit on the more on the public side. So there are other players in this, and I feel like a group that is part of the city that, you know, a city sort of exists to some extent to, you know, regulate and guide development. So we don't have the same, or shouldn't have the same kind of vested interest as a kind of you know, development industry association. So I have more thoughts, but I'll back off here. I'm just trying to say that there's a robust history in the early days. There is nothing coming at us in terms of requests. We really are at a point where we should kind of fall back on our core principles, but we haven't left a kind of playbook for ourselves. And now that our more tenured members have left, and, you know, one of our first actions, unless we vote to dissolve the group today, is, you know, should be to kind of gather those things together and figure out what manageable projects we might actually take on. Because I think the question of doing something that if we're going to self-start it, if we're going to start something, we have to be able to finish it without anyone's help at this stage.
Could I jump in here? I got into the meeting late, about 12:08, so the first 8 minutes of your brilliant discussion I missed. Let me comment about a few things, and I know I'd sent an email that there was some reference to. The first problem that City Council has at this point with Place is that I don't think there's anybody on City Council who knows what Place it has ever done or is expected to do. There's nobody on council, as far as I'm aware, who has any history with Place. I think that I am the only one with even a meager interest or history in dealing with planning issues. And that simply goes back to my having been on the Planning Commission in the 1980s and kept being interested, but not because I've been intimately involved in any of the community engagement efforts and so on that have followed. And of course, over the last 8 years, council had Kathy Galvin, obviously a design professional, obviously somebody who is deeply committed to a lot of the work that you all were doing. I remember one time, I think it was in about 2017, I ran across a reference on the city's website to Place, but the minutes hadn't been updated since 2014. I had no idea what Place did. I had no idea what Place had done. And I asked Kathy Galvin about it, figuring that she would surely know, and she was able to give me some idea of what was going on, but referenced the ongoing problem that the city has had for years with the website and with keeping the website up to date and getting boards and commissions to do minutes and all the rest of that stuff, which further complicates the problem of anybody trying to figure out who Place is and why it exists and why something ought to, let's say, get referred to it or delegated to it. So that's one broad issue. the reference to issues with, are we going to hire a long range planner? We're still trying to work on hiring a new director of NDS. There is a person, I know some of you may have been involved in the interviewing process, who had some part. There were some video interviews or Zoom interviews and so on. And apparently where we stand with that right now is that person would like to come to Charlottesville, actually physically, before deciding to take the step. This person has familiarity with Charlottesville over a period of 30 years or so, but not currently, and wants to meet some of the players and kind of see what he'd be getting into. I hope that person would ultimately agree to come. I think that person is very well qualified and would bring a lot of interesting talents and experience to the mix. So let us hope that NDS will begin to get the rest of the structure that it needs. This person has long-range planning experience, was a long-range planner for a different city. And so one of Dr. Richardson's issues was, well, maybe we don't need to hire a long-range planner. Maybe what we need to hire is an NDS director with experience with long-range planning. In any event, the decision was clear for Dr. Richardson and for council that we weren't going to hire a long-range planner before we hired a director of NDS, and that the director of NDS, in consultation with everybody else, would need to figure out what skill sets he or she brings to the process, what skill sets need to be added to the process. And so we're still a few months away probably from getting decisions on that. All of this has been extraordinarily frustrating in terms of, I spent the last year trying to tell people that I had this great plan as to why people ought to elect me, and I was going to do all these amazing things, or we collectively were going to do all of these amazing things. And between COVID and the delays that have been inherent in all of the rest of the difficulties of what's been going on in City Hall, it's been very frustrating that we haven't been able to get down to the nitty gritty. I said during the campaign last year that UVA has a plan for their future, and by implication, our future. They won't share it with us, but we know it's there. We know that they've got it. We know that it involves us, and we know that there's a decent chance that there's a lot there that we're going to need to respond to. We also know that the tech community has at least a vision, if not necessarily a plan, that we may decide as a community we don't really particularly like, but they have the power to make a lot of things happen and to make us react to what they are doing. My sense of things is that what the city needs in terms of planning at this point, if we look at what the city needs, the same thing I said a year ago at this time, we need to have a sense of what our economic future is going to look like. And then we need to figure out what the community design aspects are to keep that future something we're going to want and not something we're going to regret. Right now, my fear is that, for example, and I keep picking on what's his name, Jaffrey Woodruff, for his comment that his vision of Charlottesville would be like downtown Palo Alto. I went to Stanford. I'm wearing my Stanford t-shirt right now. I go back with some frequency because we have a son and grandson in San Mateo. I see downtown Palo Alto. I know what downtown Palo Alto was like 30, 40 years ago. It was actually kind of a charming place. Downtown Palo Alto right now is not a charming place. Downtown Palo Alto, Mr. Woodruff's idea was that you would be able to walk out of your office, go get a cup of coffee, meet some other titan of the tech industry in the coffee shop, sit down and solve the world's problems on the back of a napkin. Creative synergies would abound, flowers and unicorns would result. that one of the problems with that vision is that cup of coffee and the donut or whatever is going to cost you $10, because downtown Palo Alto is a very expensive place. The second problem with downtown Palo Alto is that the reason Palo Alto is the way that it is that all of its poor people got sent over to East Palo Alto. And it's a separate political subdivision. It has a separate tax base, everything is separate. And its racial makeup is very different. Our version of East Palo Alto is not on the other side of an 8-lane freeway. It's on the other side of one railroad track. We don't have that community that is removed from the high-tech industry. We have this community that is going to be right next to the high-tech industry. If the high-tech industry is going to locate downtown, we've got Garrett Square, Friendship Court. We've got all of the other lower income communities that are part of that neighborhood. And we've got serious equity issues that are going to result if we don't recognize that we have to balance both this tech vision and the money that it's bringing. We don't have to say in the future, it is here. That's a design issue, a city design issue that city council has not, I mean, we've complained about it, but we haven't grappled with it. It's part of what ought to be the discussion that I'm hoping is going to come out of the new comprehensive plan and all the rest of that stuff. Although it may well be that the discussion of the comprehensive plan is simply, we're going to have to be more transactional, more let's just get this damn document finished so we can do something kind of a discussion, rather than what one might hope after a 5-year process, it's now turned into would actually be a deliberative and creative process itself. I have no idea what the consultants are going to come up with, and we'll just have to see what they come up with. All of that is a very long way around to say nobody on city council has a clear idea of what we want place to do or to be. And one of the things that I personally would like to know is what you all would feel is an appropriate place for you to intervene. Back in the 80s, we didn't have place. Most of the kind of the planning things that we would talk about and community engagement, community engagement back in the 80s was 1/10 of what it is today. So we shouldn't kid ourselves, but it was largely being done through the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would have work sessions on these issues, and Satyendra Ahuja would basically write the documents and we would stamp them and say, yes, fine, go. The Planning Commission today, Rory, I don't know how you feel about the Planning Commission's involvement in some of these issues and the Planning Commission's capacity or interest for getting involved in some of these issues in a greater way. But I see, again, my experience was with a 2-layer, the council and then Planning Commission. And if we've now got a 3rd layer to the process of council, Planning Commission, place, figuring out what needs to feed to whom, and is it something where place should take a recommendation from the Planning Commission to take a look at some issues, or should place take a recommendation from City Council to take a look at some issue that for some reason either wasn't appropriate for the Planning Commission or skip the Planning Commission process for whatever reason? And so, Rory, I would direct my question to you in terms of your experience on the Planning Commission. Given, like I say, 30 years ago, you guys Planning Commission would have been what place has functioned as in recent years. How do you see that allocation?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you said about how City Council views place goes for the Planning Commission as well. I don't get the sense that most members of the commission really have any idea what place does, or have really seen any significant output from it in most members' tenure, because I'm now, I guess, somewhere in the middle there, with
The old
Hosea
pro.
now. Yeah. Yeah. I often get the sense that, in terms of review, in particular of like smart scale projects, things like the Parish Road corridor, there's some amount of duplication of effort, in that we get the review here at Place. We talk about it. Sometimes maybe the engineers make tweaks based on our comments. And then, in a work session for Planning Commission a month or two later, I see the exact same presentation, and we do the same sort of conversation. It's an interesting point about what you made about Palo Alto. So from my perspective, Palo Alto, isn't expensive and racist because tech happened in Silicon Valley, right? It started out segregationist. Then tech happened in Silicon Valley, and then they refused to allow any new homes and any of these new workers in their area to live there. And so their population hasn't grown since before the 60s. And so now you see, small, bungalow type single family homes, which is all you're allowed to have, start to be worth, $2-3 million each. And I think there's a recognition on at least the Planning Commission, and I hope council as well, that for our future as a city, given the growth that's happening here economically and at UVA, in order to create that or to accommodate that growth and not become expensive and exclusionary, we need to expand, right? And I don't mean annex, I mean build and have more housing within our borders. And at the same time, of course, there's the climate implication of that, about whether we grow within cities or sprawl. And so to me, I see the entire project of planning as a way to make that happen, like you said, in a way that we want, and not in a way that we regret, to do it well. I think the Planning Commission would like to have an active role in that high level planning, right? That comprehensive planning. And we did, and of course it's statutorily assigned to us, but now it's been outsourced by council to consultants. And I think it's a real problem that we have no idea what they're going to come up with, right? Like when consultants go and do their thing and then come back in a year or 2 or 3 or 5 and say, here's your finished product. It's in an uneditable PDF. So if you want to make any changes, you're going to have to make Lisa Robertson type the whole thing up by hand. And there's no involvement or feedback in that document getting created. That's how at the end you're like, well, maybe not, let's not do this. And then the whole thing falls apart and ends up being a huge waste of time and money. And that's what we saw, I think, with the form-based code for the SIA. And maybe that's not over and it can be recovered. Lisa already typed it all up, so I guess we should make some edits now. But I mean, to me, there needs to be an active feedback loop, and I think where Place could fit into that is that as you have this broad level plan and this vision for how growth will look in the city. There are details, right? Like the Planning Commission isn't taking a look at every single intersection, every single corner, and saying, this is how it should look. This is what we'd like to see this evolve as. And at the same time, though we call for small area plans a lot, and sometimes we do them and spend quite a lot of money on them, we don't have the resources to create a small area plan for the whole city, right? And so when you have things like a big development come in, that changes the area around it in some ways. And to some extent, they're going to be putting in surrounding infrastructure, not just utilities, but like pedestrian facilities and plazas and that sort of thing. And often that's something of an afterthought, right? They're mostly interested in whatever they're building and not how it interacts, with adjacent pedestrian facilities or the street or whatever. So, where I see places bringing value, given the expertise on the committee, is in potentially, really taking a look at that on like the project level, potentially in a sort of, even opt-in way, because you need to get buy-in from the people who are paying for it and doing it. And when that's not smart scale, it means it's probably a private developer, and be able to contribute ideas and constructive criticism in a way that makes projects and change work and happen better, and in a way that fits in with the community and improves the community. And to me, that's what placemaking means. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Great. Who hasn't? I think Tim Moore, unmute yourself. But oh, you're muted. Yeah.
So
There
I
we
am.
go.
All right, there we go. Problem with glasses. I'm probably the longest standing member that's still on, I believe. And I remember the salad days, like when we were starting West Main and all those sorts of projects. And I think the fundamental idea behind it was, one, we had a collection of professionals whose desire was to help the city see forward. We don't have unlimited amount of time. We have no budget. So we really are a review board. That's the Planning Commission, the BAR, company, basically boards of review and or the Planning Commission. I mean, that's where public engagement and really where the rubber meets the road in terms of enacting policy. But like with the West Main project, what we really tried to do was model a way forward where it wasn't just a study, but it was a study with an RFP that was written in such a way that it went from not just a study, but to an actual result. And our real interest at the time was try to help the various boards and the city write RFPs, basically use our knowledge from whatever disparate group we're coming from. And so we weren't about public engagement or any of that kind of thing in terms of our own time. What we might have some ideas about how to enhance public engagement in terms of the BAR, the Planning Commission and Council. But fundamentally, we were operating as a think tank. And I think if we start taking on advisory roles, go beyond an advisory role and beyond a sort of kind of a light-footed approach to things where we can scan, see an area that is of interest. Like Andrew and I have been working with a group that is trying to galvanize lighting. That's sort of my obsession. And Andrew and I have both been talking about that for a couple of years now, and we've got a sort of a core group. And really, I think the next step is try to actually use the BAR as a means for pushing an approach to lighting in the ADC district. So we start having something coherent to talk to private homeowners, developers, and the like. And so I think Place's role is, at least we started, was we were basically a think tank, and we were trying to identify either hotspots that needed, short-term attention right away, or also to think in a long-range way and try to help the city, as with a long-range planner, trying to outline what we think are the next steps the city needs to take to become more effective as a planning, as a community entity. So I think we have to be careful about taking on too much. And by that, I mean, if we start doing reviews and all this sort of thing, we're just, as was just said, we're becoming yet another review board. We don't need to be doing that. But I think we could help with things like RFPs and identifying, like the other thing we really tried to push through was a 3D modeling program, because that would really help the BAR. And we got that moving, and then it just kind of died on the vine for lack of funding interest from the council. But also I would say that in the days when we had more, so we say punch, it was clearly because Kathy Galvin was on council, and it was kind of her baby, and so she listened to us and basically translated into something that council could use. So that's my 2 cents.
Cliff, have you given your 2 cents or?
What's that?
Oh no, thank you, Tim. I just want to make
Oh,
sure everyone, before we kind of, I'm not sure everyone has talked. We lost Andrea Trimble. She was there and was gone. I just want to really make sure everyone says their piece. But yeah, I could second what you were saying. But Cliff, did you?
I did. I think the place has a lot of potential to help with the visioning. I think the review thing is the city does enough of that already. What we need are better ideas. How do we make the city more livable? And how do we integrate those ideas within our code? How do we create better open space? And the biking, all those elements are things that go across the city, and we need to integrate them and make the place a better place to be.
Yeah, and I think, kind of following back on, and I think, to Tim's comments, I guess now I'm drawn to the idea that there were salad days when things were happening and place made a specific contribution that was acted on. I mean, maybe some of you with more, city memory than I have. No, I mean, is it just that there was a council member who was interested? Because even when Kathy was still in council, eventually things stopped happening. The 3D modeling wasn't adopted. Getting traction on lighting, more the story was, well, it'll be built into whatever next iteration of the zoning code we have, and there will be a consultant who will deal with lighting. That became, was it just that the city just had too much on its plate at a certain point and there was no more capacity for new thinking and new initiatives? Is that what happened? Or what was the difference really? Because the ideas kept coming, to be perfectly honest. Were our ideas more scattershot than they were in the past?
Andrew, let me respond. And of course, I am not speaking for council. I'm just one,
Sure,
at this point, political analyst, because it's about things that happened before my time on council. After August 12th, 2017, a number of members of city council essentially checked out. And the way that everybody acted thereafter, it was essentially impossible to get 3 votes to do almost anything. And particularly, the fact that Kathy spent so long fighting about the forum-based code for the SIA, and it got finally adopted at her last meeting in December of 2019, after how many years of fighting and pushing, simply because the other members of council, of course, she was elected at the same time as Mike Signer and Wes Bellamy, both of whom after August 12th, they wound up going in different directions, and Mike kind of checked out of the whole thing entirely after about a few weeks of getting on MSNBC and so on. But then things went sour for him, and Wes went into a different direction, and he was interested in different issues. And of course, Nakaya was interested in her issues. Heather, I don't think, had enough interest. She was generally interested in the kinds of things interested in being supportive of Kathy, but that wasn't her passion. And so my sense is that Kathy felt, I don't have 3 votes for something. I don't have 3 votes to push a further economic design through. We can't even get a comprehensive plan done. that so much of the planning decision making was being consumed by trying to get movement with the comp plan and then the affordable housing issue emerged in a different way. It just sort of sucked all the oxygen out of the room for council. So that's my sense of what happened over the last couple of years, again, purely as an outside observer. And so part of the issue for me, as I said, I may be the person most interested in design issues, even though I am not a design professional for any at all. The issue for me is how to find issues that are or where I can find two allies, and it's not just allies on the final vote, but allies to spend council's time. When we are already running meetings until 2:30 in the morning, as we did in July, and until 12:30 in the morning, as we did 2 nights ago, it is hard to figure out how we can spend more council time. And that's one of the issues that council is going to have to talk about at our strategic retreat that is planned to be starting in a couple of weeks. We were planning to start it next week. It's actually going to get kicked back a couple of weeks for some other reasons that may become apparent in a while. But one of the things that council needs to figure out is we're not doing a good job of using our own time and our own resources. And therefore, there are so many things that we should be doing that we're just not getting to. I mean, we had this big discussion of naming streets, and it was something that people were passionately interested in. And the discussion itself started at 11:35 p.m. and it ended at 12:45 a.m. with at least, at 11:35, I said, this is nuts. We should not be discussing this issue right now. Let's put it down for a work session. We don't even know how we're going to think about thinking about it. And council said, no, we're going to go ahead. And after an hour, they said, we don't even know how we're going to think about thinking about this. We should put this down for a work session. We did, in fact, approve a couple of honorary names. But ultimately, we came to the realization that we hadn't figured out how we were going to think about. So these foundational issues for us of how we use our own time are a real problem. And I've got to work with my colleagues when we do finally have this strategic session. I hope part of our discussion will be about how we use our time and how we organize our time, and frankly, how we might be able to incorporate the services of others to take some of these issues off of our plate. Just coming back to the naming example, supposing we were to say, this is a good issue for the Historic Resources Commission or Committee. Let's let them do that. Let's not make council do that at 11:35 p.m.
So
Maybe
Lloyd,
that's the kind of discussion we need to have. Yeah, Tim.
Lloyd, the question I would also have is, is it time, for council to just literally re-examine its structure, how it's put together, how it works, just because the city's grown so much. I know one argument I've heard is, going to more of the mayor, vice mayor, kind of a more hierarchical setup, just so that you can act in a more executive and delegated fashion. I mean, just a question of whether, that's like one of the things that we talked about a while ago at Place was, are these dysfunctional issues nothing wrong with the people involved, but simply, do we need to take a harder look from a governmental side, which is not my area of expertise, but do we need to look at how we're structured and if that has something to do with our inability to move forward? And of course, the August 12th thing had a huge impact on everything, but I still think some of these problems you're facing right now are similar. I mean, the BAR, we often have meetings that end up running right up to midnight as well. We get kind of overwhelmed. There's been so much construction, not just as of late, but certainly the last couple of years.
Well, and let me answer just briefly. I know that I'm fairly sure I have an idea of how most of the other counselors would feel about it. There are, I mean, I know there's at least one who would favor a stronger mayor system than we have now. There are cities and counties in Virginia that are larger than we are who function perfectly well with a strong city or county manager or county executive and relatively weak board of supervisors or city council. So it's not simply the size that's the issue. At some point, one of the discussions to have is whether we want to financially compensate members of council in any way commensurate with the amount of work involved, and therefore perhaps expect to have a weekly meeting instead of a bi-weekly meeting. That's a different argument from the mayor, strong vice mayor kind of a system, for which there are a number of models. There's not an agreed upon model in Virginia. Richmond, I think, is the exception to basically everything in terms of the strength of its mayoral power and to the extent to which the mayor is given specific executive function, which is, of course, then delegated to a city manager in turn. I will say that without getting into an awful lot of personality stuff, there is a great deal of dysfunction between council and the city manager and others in City Hall. And that's an issue that we need to confront, and I expect that we will fairly shortly. But there's just a lot of dysfunctionality there, and
Agreed.
and I think I remember, if you want to talk salad days, back in the days when in the 80s, when Frank Buck was the mayor and Cole Hendricks was a city manager, and they were friends and they thought alike and they worked together well and they trusted each other. It was a very different environment from the environment we've had in the last couple of years. And it's just it's been a mess. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to make it less of a mess soon. More than that, I can't say.
So, for some of the new people, I just want to say something. I think you've probably heard already, but that Kathy Galvin was very much a part of our direction for years in this group, and so without that, it's sort of like, I think this is a time to sort of reinvent ourselves, because instead of, we've got, council isn't sure what place does, we're not sure how planning commission, and somebody has to take the initiative to say, like, this is what we think place can do and what we can be. And I mean, I think I'd like to see us working on sort of more of a policy level. For example, when I mentioned community engagement, I think what I was referring to is sort of how it went in talking about it at last week's meeting, or things like Tim's lighting study, things that we are interested in, that fit with the group. And even, if council wanted us to put together some, not suggestions or recommendations, but examples of different pros and cons of types of governmental systems. And even, I would even expand sort of the concept of community engagement to look at, just sort of how the city interacts with decision makers, with the public, with boards and commissions. I think we could each, offer areas that we think that the group could be involved in, and sort of see where there's interest both within the group and from outside the group with the city. I think it would be helpful if we had some ideas, because we no longer have a sort of Kathy Galvin bringing us ideas, who's very heavily involved with NDS and understands the different things. And also, for a while, we had the standard and design manual review, we had Streets That Work, we had there were so many different projects going that I think there was a little bit of a fatigue within city government. And so there weren't as many big projects to work on. And it sort of seems like now's the time that there's been a little bit of time off and there's been some changes, that we really start to think about where it is we want to go and what kind of projects we want to take on, or at least ask and see if there's interest in our help on projects.
Yeah, so I mean, to that point, just sort of organizationally speaking, I think that like we can't just sort of say this is what we're interested in, and so this is what we're gonna do, because like if what we're doing is preparing a plan or a report on behalf of either council or the planning commission, because they don't have the time to do it, which may, I don't know how they prioritize their time. I mean, to me, it seems pretty obvious that council should be meeting weekly and not start meetings at 6:30 with a 2-hour public comment in the middle if they don't want to be doing things at midnight. You know, going back to my point earlier about consultants who go do all their work in a silo in private and then come back with a finished product, that's how you get the form-based code scenario or outcome where at the very end you present it and then people are like, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. So it needs to be something that council or the commission that they want to outsource, first of all, and then second of all, like if I'm going to delegate something at work, I'm going to give it to a person that I'm confident that they will do a job that I see as adequate, and I'm willing to accept the outcome. I'm not going to have to throw it away and do it all over again, right? So, you know, to me, I think we need to be doing tasks that council and the commission want us to do. And if council and the commission don't know what we're capable of doing, and probably don't even know, you know, who's on the committee. Of course, I guess council appointed everybody. But you know, you have to build that trust or rapport to, you know, have the credibility to say, I'm going to take lighting and run off and I'll tell you what to do. And I think actually lighting is a great example of something that, like, it just came out with the commission last night with the Chick-fil-A ERB, where Jeff Werner called again for a comprehensive lighting ordinance because our ordinance doesn't understand what LEDs are, for example. And so like, we don't have time to do that really. Partially because council won't let us have work sessions, so we have to put work sessions in our regular meetings. And it seems like a relatively, I mean, it's important, but, you know, low stakes thing that could be delegated. Did planning commission last night say, wow, like we should give it to place? No, because they don't know that that's an option. And so we need to have some way to present our skill sets and abilities and potential to those stakeholder groups that we want to delegate work to us.
So that's where I think, you know, if at the very core, I think helping write RFPs, basically forming the question without, I mean, because, you know, we all have a limited amount of time. I'm actually going to have to get off here in about 5 minutes, actually. But, you know, we all bring what we know to the table. I think we help with the RFPs in particular, because if the right question is asked, then, you know, we're going to start to get results that the given board will, you know, be able to use. And I think that's, you know, that's a fairly light load, not super intensive from a research standpoint for us. So it's realistic. I mean, we're not being paid. We're all busy doing a lot of stuff. And it seems like at that level, and then if there's something in doing the RFP where we say, hey, we think this is interesting, let us dive a little bit deeper into this and ask council, you know, would you be willing to let us pursue this with the idea of, you know, doing a follow-up, whether we, you know, doing yet another RFP that a different consultant comes in on. But I think trying to, stay on top of the water and not get down, swimming underwater, really try to skip along the waves so we can kind of take in the full picture, not lose the forest for the trees, use a whole lot of stupid similes. But I think being able to have a view without being buried in the details, I think is really important. And I think that's something where, trying to stay at the RFP level, and then, like with the lighting group, that's a detail that interested me. So we all sort of dived off and have been working on that, but it doesn't, it doesn't disrupt the general intent of place, and nor the council for that matter. But ultimately, I do feel it's something that we really have to address, that just as a for instance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about RFPs and about posing the question at the very early stage. So I think that's something the city has been really lacking in the past. I mean, you look at the concept design for the parking garage, right? Where we know that that staff gave Kimley Horn the constraints, do it within existing zoning because we're afraid that council won't let us, get extra height for an SUP or rezone to downtown extended or whatever. I'll put aside the whole blocking the grid and spending millions of dollars on it, but like, if design was thought about in an earlier stage there, without just thinking about how can we, at the absolute cheapest and easiest and without having to rely on council, get something out the door that satisfies this county agreement, we could have produced a lot of a better product there.
Absolutely. And that's the kind of thing that's really frustrating, is when we see something get that far down the road and then you're kind of putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah, though, I mean, honestly, let's be real, like even the 30% design RFP hasn't even gone out yet. We just authorized the bonds for that. So, I mean, that's like a right now thing.
Right.
But also in terms of deliverables, like we need to actually produce the deliverables. Like, as I recall, when I got on place, the thing that Planning Commission knew that place was assigned was the community engagement chapter of the comp plan, where I guess we were supposed to design how community engagement should work in this town. And as far as I know, none of that was ever really written. Certainly nothing was delivered. And so I don't even really know if it was ever significantly discussed. It was mostly before my time. But I'd like to know how place got to be assigned that chapter, and how it ended up with that outcome.
I don't recall that, but
I can tell you, I was part of it.
Yep.
Yeah. We were involved with the comprehensive plan. Ginny was on place. Ginny was the one who suggested there be a community engagement chapter, and it was accepted by the Planning Commission. And we went through numerous rounds of community engagement by the city, and the community engagement chapter was never part of any of the community engagement. And we were getting to the point where the comp plan was going to be submitted, and staff was telling us that, or at least they were telling me, that there wouldn't be any, nobody would see the community engagement chapter before it was submitted. So that there wouldn't be any direct community engagement on the community engagement chapter. Previous to that, they actually, there was a lot of back and forth. Planning Commission thought staff was supposed to take the initiative to write it. Staff was saying Planning Commission needed to take the initiative to write it. So we were just trying to fill a role of communication and get, have it be part of the conversation. And so because the chapter was being written and not being, well, it goes into a lot of detail. Like, the city did outreach to a lot of neighborhood groups and nonprofits, and their questions about the community engagement were all about how do you do community engagement. It was all about how the city wanted information from these groups about how they do community engagement. There were no questions saying, what would you like from a community engagement chapter from the city? What is it you want? And so we actually worked with some of those people who had been contacted and been part of that process. And it was just about saying, like, this is how we would like the process to go. We weren't writing a chapter. Like, we didn't do the community engagement. We are not, we couldn't write a chapter, even though there were people who wanted us to, because we didn't do the community engagement. We were just saying like this, we're not going to write a chapter. This is how the process that we think you need to take to write the chapter, because this is following like standard community engagement rules of International Association of, and we had numerous professionals from the community working on it. So that's a little bit of the history. It definitely gets more involved than that. But I'd like to go back to something else that you mentioned, Roy. It was about, having people seeing some of these projects earlier in the process. And that's also community engagement. It's how the staff is engaging the community. Boards and commissions were members of the community too. It's not just how they check a box for a development, project. It's more about a culture of when the community gets involved in things or is notified of things. And I've seen on lots, I've been on numerous boards and commissions, tree commission, bicycle pedestrian, and many others. And it's always a mix of things that are brought to us from the city and things that we've identified as something the city maybe hasn't noticed, because council and planning commission are busy. If we just wait for them to kind of come up with something for us, that may not happen. They have really a lot of things. And that's why I suggested we think about things that we could do for them and start to get some feedback about what their interest areas are. Just like we heard at the other meetings, well, we can't go to the community until we have something to show them. I'm just suggesting that we talk about things that we can show them, that we think fit with our skill sets, or that we think we're capable of doing, that fit in with our charge, our bylaws, and that we think the city could use help with.
But I think it'd also be good, Lena, for the city just to kind of be open book with us about RFPs before they go out, so that you might see an RFP going out, say for the parking garage, that clearly is lacking a community engagement component.
Absolutely.
And so I think the RFPs are the key to this. I really think getting stuff before it goes out the door at a gestational level would really help. And then, if it's an RFP that we're just not really going to be interested in, like, new trash cans for the park or something, unless it's an ADC district, we'll say pass. But if it's something that clearly is going to affect the quality of a neighborhood or, a street or whatever, then we may say, hey, did you think of this? I think like you might say, head up an individual task force that really does a deep dive into community engagement, like you were doing earlier, me with lighting. I think people can sort of pursue their personal interests relative to an RFP, but I think that what would really help is for us to get ahead of the game, so we can help the city envision a better future, and also try to identify pitfalls before we fall into one at 30% release.
So we should try to figure out sort of before we break up how this conversation we're having, and we've had others like this before, needs to be captured in some way, because I'm aware of a lot of things are being said that make sense to me, and plenty of things are being said also that I don't agree with at all. And I'm not sure how we sort of, we need to figure out, probably at a future meeting, this definition of what we take on and don't take on, so that we're not simply reacting to stuff that people throw at us because they're not sure what we do, but maybe we'll do it. I think this notion of what BAR does and the fact that we're not a review board is pretty important, because I felt like almost every time I sat through a smart scale presentation that I also saw on the tree commission, it's like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? So, and I'm not necessarily convinced of the idea that we should just kind of dream up stuff for ourselves to do. I think that there's a pretty well-defined role that we can establish But for me, it's always based on the fact that I feel that projects that go before the Planning Commission have inadequate information to make an informed decision. I don't know if Rory agrees with that or the rest of the Planning Commission does, but that's the thing that kind of floats my boat with this organization. And what I know, Kathy was also kind of very concerned about, that we were getting a lot of projects where you couldn't even tell what was going on in the project. There was not enough information to show the context of the adjacent buildings. And so if you want to improve the quality of the built environment, you have to have, you have to know what is being proposed. And so anyway, I'd like to gather this together somehow and really set a course. I know we all do.
Well, I maybe make this recommendation. I mean, we've been talking about this for an hour and 15 minutes, and it's good. It's a good conversation. I think the next step is, I don't know what we do about setting a chair and vice chair in an interim fashion, and I would vote for they can be interim or something like that. But because I think we have the capability of doing that kind of thing as a task force. But I think what I would say is that I think if we can wait till next month, actually craft language, we say this function, this is what we can do, and this is what we would need from council and staff and planning commission if we are to be able to do this. Because I think what I'm hearing is that, again, to use more metaphors like Tim's, we're going to be sticking our finger in a dike almost no matter what we do, because there's a lot of dysfunction around us. But I think there are specific things we can do that sound, the RFP review, the policy direction setting, that are things that we can do. But it does depend, if NDS doesn't send us RFPs, then we'll never have an agenda in an RFP world. So I think maybe next month it should be, here are the functions of place. This is our expertise as a constituted body of community members and experts in this field of planning, which is a very important thing because clearly it's critical to the future of who can live here and is it sustainable and well-being. This is what we can do to help. This is what we need to make it work, and present that to council. And I don't know. I mean, is that worth even presenting to council to say, this is what we are, this is what we can do? And if it flies, then we continue. And if it doesn't fly, then we have to decide if we sunset.
I totally agree.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Especially here's what we need from you too.
Yeah,
Right.
From council's perspective, I think it would be very useful. I guess I would offer two comments, and I've only been a part of this group for I guess about 6 months, 8 months. I went to one meeting before today's meeting, and that's the extent of my involvement. So I don't really I'm not going to claim any sense of expertise in how you do or ought to work. But I would note two things. First of all, it is possible for two of this body and two city councilors, as long as I'm not one of them, because I would count towards the other, it's possible to do some meetings or joint phone calls or something like that that don't require, I don't want to be skirting too egregiously the purpose of the Open Meetings Act, but I also want to emphasize that it is possible for more than one person to have a thought and to communicate it to others and to have a discussion. And one of the things that we've lost sight of in this COVID world, when we know that any group meeting requires the offices of Brian Wheeler or Joe Rice and limitations on all that implies, I think we on council certainly have lost the ability. I mean, even these days you can't very well. I mean, I guess we can now, but we couldn't before. I couldn't call up one of my colleagues and say, "Hey, let's go to lunch," because the restaurants weren't open. Well, now the restaurants are open. That helps a little bit, but it may be possible to have more interaction in smaller fashion or more sort of discussions by serial emails. I guess our city attorney would say, if you're doing one of these serial email things, people should wait 10 minutes before responding. Otherwise, it starts to look too much like an electronic meeting. But the point is, there are ways around this to work together on some of these things to then present to council. If you present something, if you come up with something you want presented to council, I am happy to present it to council. Again, I think council needs to, number one, delegate to people with more expertise than we possess. And none of us has any expertise in design issues. And so there is always going to be a role, to the extent that you all want to serve in that role. There's always going to be a role for you. Number two, I'm trying to encourage counselors to do more of the, what I would call, 2-on-2 meetings, 2 city councilors and 2 planning commissioners, or something like that, where we can begin to talk to one another. My sense of things when I talk to my colleagues is that although they've watched the planning commission meet, they don't understand kind of what the planning commission is doing. And we need to work on that, and we need to improve our knowledge of what we have delegated and our knowledge of the people to whom we have delegated. And so the more that we can begin that process, the notion that everything that has to happen in the city has to happen through city council is paralyzing us.
Well,
And I really want to get away from that. And if you send us something, I'll take it up and see what support we can get.
Just to reinforce your point, Lloyd, about the meeting, I mean, the BAR has basically been doing that now for years, where we definitely take advantage of the 2-person thing. So we'll meet with, an applicant as pairs, and we might even, in some cases, one person leaves, another one comes, so we have some continuity. But that you can be aggressive with it without being
Illegal.
Underhanded. I mean, it is very frustrating, though. It makes it like having sort of a think tank discussion. I mean, that's one of the things Fred and Wolf and I were always a little frustrated with about Place, was that we felt that, we're not a legally governing body. We have no power. So it always seemed a little strange to us that FOIA actually applied for that reason. With the BAR, it totally makes sense, because the BAR is we have legal power.
So, I mean, one thing I'd point out, though, I'm not personally a fan of 2-on-X's because I feel like they're intentionally opaque. But I hear what Lloyd said about the constraint, in this COVID world where we have to record meetings. But right now we're operating under this paradigm where every meeting is live streamed onto Boxcast, which isn't actually what's required by the state emergency ordinance. Obviously, it makes it's necessary for council and planning commission and major committees. But if we were to have essentially a work session or some sort of smaller subcommittee thing, to me, I think it would be reasonable, given that these are meetings that used to happen in a back room in NDS and never get recorded, to just click that record button on Zoom and then send it to communication staff to upload to the internet later, so that we're not taking up their time in real time.
I would have to defer to Mr. Blair or Ms. Robertson on the details of that, but I completely agree. Right now, the amount of community access to government, because of all of the way we've been doing things, is about 500 times more than it ever was. And maybe it only needs to be 495 times more than it ever was.
I would also say, like, the BAR meetings, interestingly enough, I think are actually more accessible on Zoom to the general public than they are when we're doing it in the council chambers.
Yeah.
So, folks, I need to roll. I liked what Andrew said about putting something together for the next meeting, and this was interesting. But I got to.
do you want to be, I mean, I think we were getting ready to talk about chairs and vice chair. Are you interested in staying for that or?
Um, well, if we do it quickly, yep, but I do have to roll, so.
I mean, I think Andrew's doing a great job
Oh,
so
no.
far. So I would nominate him as our new, temporary or.
Can it be
or-
temporary? I mean, seriously, I think we're in a transitional period. I would do it, let's say 3 months at a time. Can we just,
I think that's smart while we're deciding what we're doing. So you would accept a 3-month temporary chair nomination?
I would second that.
thanks, everybody. Okay.
Thanks, Andrew.
No, that's great. And I mean, but we have, the agenda is the agenda. I think we're all good with that agenda for next month, is that we're going to craft what our capabilities are and what we can do, what we would need from different parties to make that, with the goal of then taking it to you, Lloyd, and hopefully being able to present it to council and then to planning commission as an introduction of, here's what we could do. And so let's clear the air after years of not really being clear about that.
Well, and
Let's
one of the
also-
things that I would ask is that if we do that, that we also, that members, some number, 2 at a time of this group would meet by phone, conference call, whatever, with counselors. And that I hate to use council meeting time when people end up using it simply to get up to speed. I find that intensely frustrating, that even, and I don't blame them particularly, I sometimes do it as well. But we need to be more effective in the use of our time during meetings. And so anyway, so I just offer that.
I'm happy to participate in that. I think I would like to do that after our next meeting.
That's fine.
But I'm, once we actually have a collective sense of what we can do. And what
Once it's time to sell something,
Yeah.
we need to sell it.
Very
I
happy.
would also like to include the BAR in that, basically, I mean, I talk to the BAR all the time, obviously, but I just think whatever we present to the planning commission, I think we ought to just also sort of bring the BAR up to speed to see if anybody has any specific things they want to do other than my obsession with lighting.
Good. Okay.
And the 3D model.
Well, good.
just wanted-
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, anyone go ahead. I mean, honestly.
Sorry, I just wanted to note really quick that you made a nomination in a second, but I don't believe there was an actual vote. If you wanted to complete that, or if there's more discussion, that's completely fine.
I call the question.
All in
Wait,
favor? All in favor of Andrew
Aye.
as chair? For
Aye.
the period?
Aye.
Any nays?
No,
I think
No
okay.
Motion carries.
And if you want to put an interim vice chair in place so that if Andrew has to
Yeah, I'll
step away
take
from
that.
a meeting or anything, that's certainly fine if you'd like to
Please.
do that.
Anybody, honestly, you would all be welcome partners.
Maybe we can do that next week when we're talking about the different projects.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
That's it. We got started.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, well,
Very
nice to
good
talk to
that.
everybody.
Yeah.
gotta
Thanks,
roll.
Tim.
Bye all.
Thanks, Tim.
Aye.
Bye.
Right now, bye-bye.
Thanks, Carrie. So the only other questions that I think we'll open it up for end of session comment here really soon, but I don't want to totally end it entirely yet. Let's ask Carrie. So Carrie, we're on this mission. Do we need to add people while there's vacancies, or can we wait until we figure out what's going on? Or what do you all think about that? But actually, yeah, I don't know if I have an opinion. Let
Yeah,
her.
actually,
Yeah.
I wanted to bring that up just as a point in itself. Something to consider beyond what our mission is what should be the makeup of this body. And so when it was apparently originally created, it was much smaller, and then it's kind of slowly grown over time. And to me, when it's full, which is not super often, I guess, but there were a few meetings last year where we had pretty much a full house. It seemed to me to be kind of large and unwieldy. You know, when you get a committee that's too big, everyone goes around and says their piece, and you know, you're not ever able to get anything done, especially when you had a 60-minute presentation from the engineers about whatever they're doing, when we could have just read the packet. You know, like, if we're going to be doing design in this committee, I think we need to be trying pretty hard to make whatever our output is not, you know, the stereotype of design by committee. And part of that is to be a sort of lean and nimble working group, and not just a round table.
Well, I think the only thing that I would kind of, I think there's good points to that. I think while we're rethinking what we are, I'm comfortable with not adding additional people until we actually, you know, we should be open for comment. In other words, we should, you know, invite comment from the public, from attendees, which we're about to do in this meeting, as well as we speak with people on council, people on different boards, and public comment, rather than just adding people willy-nilly before we really know what's going on. So I support not doing that right now if we're allowed to not do that.
My thought is that what the product is may determine who we want on the board. And if you're headed in a more project review oriented way, then you want to make sure you've got this and this and this and this all represented. And if you're headed towards a more conceptual kind of thing, then there may be some different interests. So let's get that product figured out first, would be my recommendation.
Fantastic.
So since council actually appoints the people, that's not really our role. Are we asking them then to wait before they appoint new people?
Oh.
Because
do
I mean,
Yeah.
they are the ones that appoint new members, and then whether they have an open application process happening, you know, that's.
I don't know whether we've advertised vacancies for place. Carrie, do you know?
So I was looking to pull it up now, so I don't know offhand. The clerk of council handles those applications and posting them, and then getting them before council at a time. So I'm perusing now, but I can also check with that office to get an understanding of the time frame for the recently vacated positions.
And when you do so, you might suggest that we're not anxious to have those positions advertised yet.
Sure.
And I'll pass it on through my channels as well. But I think it behooves us for place to kind of get figured out first before we decide who else ought to be added.
Very good.
Yeah, last time I looked at the website, I saw place was listed, but that was a month or so back. So I don't know if that's still the case.
There is still a listing that closes tomorrow on the 11th for the, looks like for the preservation position, which Rachel Lloyd previously held. So I do not yet see Mike and Fred's positions listed. It looks like these applications would be before council September 21st, and then on December 21st, there's another round with that deadline being December 11th.
Well, I don't think there's any law that requires that we advertise positions immediately. So obviously we have to move, at least we have to address applicants who have already applied for an already advertised position. But even one of the responses may still be, we're not going to decide yet.
Right.
So
Right.
Anyway.
Okay.
I mean, there's certainly no law given that these positions don't actually exist in our bylaws. So
Good. Well, does anyone have any other comment before we open to our attendees?
I guess I didn't really speak up earlier when we were talking about things, and I had to duck out, so I may have missed some stuff. But I think for me, I think trying to keep place maybe more in a visioning or also somewhat policy standpoint, as opposed to reviewing every single smart scale that comes through. That feels really redundant. I think several people mentioned that already. And honestly, just kind of looking at things, not just from what can we help council with now, like things that are showing up as problem spots in the city, for different things. Like, and I don't know if we want to go as far as maybe trying out some small tactical urbanism projects, just to pilot something to see if it would work. Because I feel like a lot of the time people are like, oh, that wouldn't work here in Charlottesville for fill in the blank. And it doesn't have to be anything big, just something small, like changing the parking for a week downtown or something. I mean, that's not small. That would probably cause a riot, but besides parking, but some other small tactical urbanism project that we can run as a pilot, to maybe see, is this a direction we want to go? What are the problems with that sort of thing? And maybe that's more ambitious than we want to go, but I feel like should be more visioning and more earlier in the process than where we have been.
And
Excuse me, folks, I've got to duck out. I've got an emergency phone call, but I will look forward to next month's meeting.
Okay,
Thanks.
Bye, Lloyd.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That point about tactical urbanism, I think, is a really good one. Not something any other that council or the commissioner are capable of doing. And really right now during COVID is something that's desperately needed, right? Like restaurants, especially ones that don't have patios in the mall, are really struggling. We've got streets that are mostly empty, and every other city in the country basically is doing little parklets or eating streeteries, I guess, or whatever. And especially as we're moving into fall and winter, something is gonna give, and either we make the space for restaurants to survive in COVID safely, or we're gonna see a lot more closures like we've seen over the last couple weeks.
Well, I mean, honestly, let's put that on the list for meeting. Can we, and again, the problem is we would need a lot of staff would have to support us heavily in that. And I think, what you're bringing up, by the way, I don't have that much background information, but I think it's been proposed, very good proposals from staff that haven't happened. So I think there's a lot of, so again, for us, I think next month, we'll because that's tactical urbanism is definitely after my own heart, but I think, yeah, let's talk about it. So, okay. Any other comments before we open up to public comment?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, just jumping off that, is I think we really need advice and information from staff, because it sounds like, community engagement chapter aside, some of the really good things that have been done in this committee have died in City Hall behind closed doors. So especially if we're going to be orienting towards something RFP related, but regardless, we're going to need the cooperation of staff and the buy-in of staff, right? And when staff is killing its own projects for unclear reasons, like the COVID open streets proposal, and never remarking on it, if things were just going into a black hole, and the 3D modeling idea sounds really cool, and I would have loved to see it, but things are going to a black hole and nothing gets done. It just makes this committee look bad because we're the ones who wanted it to happen, and then it failed. So.
All right, and by the way, so I do want to, I think this is an important point. We haven't, we do need staff input, and I think we're trying to constitute ourselves. And I think, Alex, what you have to say, and Carrie, what you have to say, and Patrick, we do need to know what you think, even as we try to craft something that is idealized. We're going to try to come up with an ideal of what should work. And then I think you'll have reasons why it can or can't work that I'm sure you'll tell us. Would you all like to make any comment now, or do you want to wait until our next meeting?
So I would defer to Alex about the questions you guys are asking, given that the level of the policy-based questions.
Okay.
So in terms of the policy questions, what exactly are you guys looking at?
I think just as an example, and this is only an example, I think a policy level question could be something like, can the city do more tactical urbanism piloting, or can they, or can we invest in hiring someone to do a lighting ordinance? Whereas RFP review is very much we want to be in on the ground floor when we know a project's going to happen. So that's
yeah. I think in terms of RFP, I think we had that discussion before. It's really tough because it's a department by department activity or administration. So the city council will have to actually make that directive, but from somebody who has prepared RFP a number of times or coordinated that, with representatives from appropriate city departments, it can be challenging, to get people from outside, unless it's by contract, depending on what the project is, because from time to time, localities, they hire a consultant to structure and prepare RFP, for them. So in terms of that request, it's not something that you just talk to NDS, because right now, because of the restructuring, we have a limited RFP activities right now. Everything related to smart scale projects, pedestrian operations or projects are now under public works. So you have to be dealing with more than just NDS, in order to get that issue resolved. But I have to point out that the RFP issue, it's a pretty good challenge. But I think there is a hope along the way, because I think staff is rethinking, like the smart scale, for instance, starting it earlier, that way the design issues, some of the design issues or concern can be put on the table and addressed before formulating the application process. So that might be something that you guys will weigh in. I also know that one of the partners in terms of a smart scale submissions is Thomas Jefferson MPO, and they are developing a system right now as we speak that will require some kind of advanced or pre-application earlier discussion and design before they put the application together. So I think there is hope in that direction. But barring those, other aspects, it might be a little bit challenging, and then it might be something that you guys may have to talk to the lead team about, the citywide executive team about that. What was the other question?
I don't know. I think that was, I think mostly we just, I think that kind of information is really important, because as we go forward, saying what we can do and what we'll need, your input is obviously critical to that. So thank you. I think those are the things we're gonna have to think through as we idealize what place could be, and then propose that to, to different bodies. Staff might need things too. And maybe there are things that really aren't set up for. We're gonna learn that. That's our goal here.
And I mean, that's an important point about the division of RFPs among staff offices, because thinking about the parking garage RFP example from earlier, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, wasn't that an economic development department RFP?
Exactly.
So
yeah, it's economic development.
When they do the 30% design, will that still be economic development, or will that be public works?
Economic development will still be leading that. They'll be like de facto administrator of the project. Public works will be part of it, because it's going to involve traffic engineering. It's going to involve the city engineer, dealing with the access, sidewalk, the streets, So the traffic engineer, the city engineer, and other engineering staff will be involved, and that is public works.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the issues we've confronted is, and why, you know, and not to open up a new thing, just, yeah, we need to think about what departments have the most significant impacts on the built environment. And it's, and NDS is the biggest one, but it is not just NDS at all. And so I think that's a big deal. So, all right, so we'll talk about it. Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. We'll continue this. And so, yeah, I think with that, yeah, Alex, did you want to say anything else, or does anyone want to add anything else before I open it to public comment? Okay, yeah, well then let's open it to public comment. Does anyone want to make a comment from members of the public?
This is Patrick. There's nobody has their hand raised and from the public.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's adjourn.
Well, congratulations, Mr. Chair.
Oh boy.
Your election.
Thank you. No. Yeah, for 3 months, 3 months. This is, you know, I'm a caretaker government. Exactly. So, but thanks everyone. I think it was good. So yeah, talk to you all next month, if not sooner.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.